The toppling of Bashar al-Assad was something few analysts had predicted years after the dictator brutally crushed opposition forces during the country's long civil war. Now, with Assad himself in exile in Russia, the Islamist group that led the offensive against him, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is in power in Damascus. And today, the French foreign minister has said the European Union could lift sanctions on Syria soon, this in an attempt to bring more aid into the country. Well, our reporter James Andre crossed into Syria on the 9th of December last year, that just a day after Assad fell, and he's with me now for some analysis. James, we'll talk about where Syria is a month on from Assad's fall in a moment, but just first of all, paint a picture for us. You crossed that border, you drove into Damascus. What did you see and what was it like?
Well, I mean, it was an amazing moment simply because we really, drove across the border. There was absolutely no soldiers there. There was no one guarding that border except for a small group of militiamen who were actually welcoming people coming back rather than controlling anything, really. And as you can see on these pictures, we saw, a group of people who were refugees for 10 years coming back to their own country for the first time and indeed being greeted by these men in arms. And it was very emotional also to drive towards Damascus. What we saw all over was people tearing down the portraits of Bashar al-Assad, celebrating on the streets. And then eventually we arrived at Omiyad Square. And there, if you like, it was a big family party in a sense, with people firing a lot of guns in the air, of course. And there were casings all over the place. But very much a sense of joy for, I'd say, a large group of the population. Then again, shops were closed in the days that followed. Administrations were closed as well. Of course, a lot of people who were close, for example, to the regime of Bashar al-Assad were extremely weary, were not really coming out or speaking to anyone. And then, of course, there was the Alawite community that was rather in panic. So, it was this moment of, I'd say, the regime has just collapsed. It was open. People were very happy. A lot of the people we were speaking to were telling us, whatever comes after cannot be any worse, of course, because they were talking about the arrival of Mohammed al-Shara, who no one really knew was going to do. And then just another thing was, of course, we understood why people were so happy when we visited the prisons of the regime and the gruesome detention conditions, and also met those who'd just come out of these prisons and the families searching for relatives. So that was very much the picture at the time. I'd say a lot of joy when it comes to the majority of the population, and also, for example, at school where we went to the first day of school of the post-Assad era, but in the same time, a lot of question marks by a lot of those who were closer, I'd say, to the former regime.
All right, so we are a month on then from those scenes we're looking at behind you that you filmed when you were in Damascus. Let's talk about Syria now then. Its de facto leader, you mentioned him, Ahmed al-Shara. He's an Islamist. He previously ran Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's operations in Idlib province. He now runs the whole country, and he has a real tightrope to walk, doesn't he? Because he both needs to not alienate the Islamists who fought with him, who toppled Assad, but also he needs to reach out to Western countries because, as I mentioned, Syria needs to have its sanctions lifted, and he needs Western countries, obviously, in order to be able to do that.
Well, exactly. I mean, it puts it in a nutshell. For now, he still has a $10 million bounty on his head by the U.S. Department of Security, simply because he's considered a terrorist. That has not been lifted as of yet. And for now, the Americans are saying, right, very well, we will talk to you, we'll discuss with you. They have talked about lifting some of the sanctions to enable, humanitarian aid to flow into the country. But right now, you've got to remember that the Syrian economy, of course, is in shambles. It's lost, pretty much. It's worth 1/10 of what it was worth before the war 12 years ago. There are still sanctions. The Caesar sanctions are still in place. So it's very much a situation where, yes, he absolutely needs to open the country up to its partners. May it be, of course, the Americans, but also the French, for example. We saw the Germans visit as well. Basically, all, most Western countries have tried to take contact with Ahmed al-Shara and his organization. Now, we've seen him change as well. That was interesting. We saw the beginning of that change. By the time we were leaving Syria, he'd gone from jihadi leader to, I'd say, Che Guevara style clothes. And then by the following week, he was basically dressed up in suits and looking absolutely like a Western politician. So we did see that happen. But in the meantime, he started naming an interim government that indeed is there to, take a government until the country can organize elections. Now, something is going to happen in March, but we don't exactly know what that will be because that'll be way too early to hold free and fair elections. You can expect that to last for a few years. But for example, I will give you an example. He did choose as his defense minister the foreign leader of the armed forces of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which you've got to remember was the al-Nusra Front before. So that was basically affiliated with al-Qaeda. Obviously, for example, he will name him as his defense minister. And in a sense, a lot of people are saying, right, this new interim government is not inclusive. There are no women. There are no members of other communities. So this is not okay. But on the other hand, you've got to realize that he's taking control of a country that has within it many forces that are challenge, that are vying for power. He's just come in. So, for example, if you take this choice of the defense minister, there is a logic to it. Obviously, he needs to give guarantees to those who fought alongside him, who enabled him to reach this position. Obviously, this did not happen, in an easy context, and people have fought with him for 10 years. And a lot of them are hardliners, real jihadists. He says he's changed. He says that, he was 20 when he had his very extreme positions, and now he's moved on as he's coming up for 50. But still, he has to compose with that very hard wing of jihadists that worked with him in the first place, and all the while giving guarantees and being open and trying to unify a country that, of course, is deeply divided because of 12 years of war.
And look, you've already alluded to this very clearly. There are huge challenges ahead for him and for Syria, not least when it comes to the country's territorial integrity now. And we have Israel that has taken some more territory in the Golan Heights, and we have Kurdish groups in the northeast of Syria. Really quite a complicated situation there. Just sort of spell out for us as much as you can what's happening in those Kurdish regions.
Okay, so if we want to, let's try and break it down quite easily. We have this map here. You can see that yellow part, the northeast. That is the part that is controlled right now by the Syrian Democratic Forces. The Syrian Democratic Forces are a very powerful militia that is backed by the United States and that is indeed built along. Its backbone, if you will, is the YPG, YPG, which is, if you like, aligned with the PKK in Turkey. So for the Turks, it's unacceptable that these people control that piece of land. At the same time, Ahmed al-Shara needs to retake control of that piece of land because that's where all the oil is, for starters, but also because he wants to unify the situation. Problem is, for now, is that the Kurds are weary, obviously, of al-Shara and know very well that there is a very big risk if they, set their arms down. And then you have the Americans who are, on the one hand, backing the Kurds, not, also because they are the ones who are keeping around 9,000 jihadists from the Islamic State group that still exist. That is another challenge. In around 20 prisons, they're guarding them with the help of the Americans, who have actually doubled the amount of soldiers they've got on the ground to about 2,000 at this stage. So this is going to be a very big equation. The Turks will not want autonomy for the Kurds. The Kurds want autonomy. The central government needs to retake control of the arms and the oil in that area. How is that going to pan out? Very big question. Then, of course, these grey parts are where we have members of the Islamic State group still operating. That is another challenge. These people do not agree. HTS and Daesh have fought bitter wars and obviously are at odds. So that's going to be a challenge. And then down south, you will have the Druze, who also have their own interests. So it's a very, very dividing landscape. And then around here, around Tartus, this is where you have the Alawite stronghold. And they are regrouping right now. They're being pushing out of all the positions of power they held. Bashar al-Assad was Alawite, so most of the officers in his army were Alawite as well. And basically, they are seen as collaborators with the former regime. So they are being persecuted right now, even though HTS is doing everything it can to avoid bloodshed. And this is very much the message they're sending out at the moment. And it was when we were there. But still, there is tension and pressure there. And of course, a risk there again to a potential central government. So everyone is going to want a piece of that cake. Right now, HTS has got all the positions of power, which is logical. It's the beginning, and they need to consolidate their position. But they have this equation of managing to unite the country. They also need to deliver justice to the victims of Bashar al-Assad's regime, all the while trying to give guarantees to the international community in order to have these sanctions lifted and to jumpstart the economy. So it's pretty complicated.
Complicated picture indeed. Thank you very much, though, for breaking that down for us. James Andre, for us there.